Happy Halloween, everybody.
Hello there, welcome to my review of Evil Dead 2. As part of my Halloween season, I will be reviewing 4 horror film sequels that are arguably better than the first film. This is a sequel to Sam Raimi's directorial debut, The Evil Dead, which saw a group of kids drive up to a cabin in the woods, unleash an unspeakable evil thanks to the Necronomicon Ex Mortis, the Book of the Dead, that slowly possesses them one by one, leaving only Ash Williams, played by Bruce Campbell, alive by the end, about to be attacked by that evil force. The sequel begins with essentially a remake of the entire first film within its first few minutes, as Raimi lacked the rights to use footage from the first film in the sequel. This remake slims the story down to just Ash and his girlfriend Linda.
So what's this place like?
Well, it's a little run down, but it's right up in the mountains.
Are you sure it's deserted?
Oh, yeah. I think so.
Before she is taken by the evil within the woods and returned as a possessed zombie, who Ash quickly dispatches before this force comes for him. That's where the sequel really begins, if you've seen the first film, but is an entertaining enough opening if you haven't. The films came out in 1981 and 1987 respectively, at a time when horror as a genre was booming. This resurgence was very much down to the success of John Carpenter's Halloween in 1978. There were other successful horrors in the 70s, notably The Exorcist, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Carrie and Jaws in Hollywood, as well as the Giallo in Italy and Hammer Horror in the UK. The difference is, none of these really led to an explosion of good copycats, or let's be honest, bad rip-offs. There were certainly rip-offs, but none of them, including the many Jaws copycats, were successful on their own merits. What happened after Halloween is we had several successful franchises, such as Friday the 13th and A Nightmare on Elm Street, as well as The Evil Dead, and hundreds of one-off films. All of these films delivered low-budget, high-gore films, which coincided with the explosion of the home video market, which meant you didn't need to show your film in cinemas in order to make money. Why I think Evil Dead 2 succeeds as a sequel where other films failed is not just because it has the same creative team behind it, or because it isn't just a rehash of the first film, but because it leans more heavily into the best aspects of the first film, while giving us something new, and has built a world with far more scope to tell interesting stories. The plot of this film sees Ash temporarily possessed by the evil he accidentally released, before it's purged by sunlight. He is then tormented by the evil. His hand is possessed, forcing him to cut it off. Then the daughter of the owners of the cabin turn up with her colleague and 2 locals guiding them to the cabin and assume Ash has killed her parents.
Oh my God. Where are my parents?
As that misunderstanding is cleared up, the evil picks them off one by one until only Ash and the daughter are left to deal with the increasingly large threat of evil, and they kind of make things worse. That basic structure is similar to the first film, but it's the differences in the details that sets the film apart. The first film is 5 college kids who know nothing about what's going on and are attacked in such a way that the evil acts like an unstoppable killer, a bit like a slasher film. In the sequel, Ash learns about the evil and has the advantage of something of an expert in the daughter, Annie.
Recitation of this first passage will make this dark spirit manifest itself in the flesh. Recitation of the second passage creates a kind of rift in time and space, and the physical manifestation of this dark spirit can be forced back into the rift.
There's also a recognizable antagonist in Annie's possessed mother.
Once in my fruit cellar.
This isn't what makes the film great, though. It's the perfect blend of horror and comedy, in a way so few horror comedies succeed, and also throws in some action movie cliches for good measure.
Groovy.
It's unapologetically slapstick comedy, bad puns,
Here's your new home.
and gross out humour with some truly grotesque horror moments. The incongruity of making Ash an action hero amongst this horror chaos also adds to the humour, and is truly an original take. Unlike, say, Predator, which introduces a horror element into an action film, the idea of Laurie Strode or Nancy Thompson tooling up in order to take down Michael Myers or Freddy Krueger is inherently hilarious, and the tones of those films would not accept that happening easily. But having this film balance the horror and comedy throughout means that it feels almost inevitable that Ash becomes an action hero. It's also interesting to see Raimi's unique filmmaking style in its infancy, a style that would permeate his films up to this day, with Dutch angles and dynamic handheld shots cropping up in even his biggest budget films. It's also probably no coincidence that in his last film, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, we have character designs like this, and Scarlet Witch's use of reflections definitely echoes a similar scene in Evil Dead 2, where Ash is tormented by his reflection. This stylistic approach fits the storytelling in this film perfectly, as it creates an unsettling atmosphere where anything can happen, in a plot where anything can happen. You could easily nitpick this film to death, as there are continuity errors, the characters and the evil itself act erratically and inconsistently, and there are plot holes. But none of that matters, because it doesn't detract from the enjoyment of watching the film unless you let it. You can nitpick any film to death in this way, as no film is 100% perfectly crafted, and if you aren't enjoying the film, you are more likely to focus on those nitpicks, indicating it might not be a great film, or at least not for you. But those nitpicks are not the reason for it being a bad film. If you're in a restaurant and the food is great, but the music is a little loud and the service is a little slow, you'll probably still like the restaurant. But if the food is bad, you'll likely also point out those other problems when forming an opinion of the place. This film has a great chef in the kitchen. I'm not going to worry if the table is a little wobbly. The effects are, of course, all practical. It was 1987, and they are done very well, which is exactly what you'd expect from Tom Sullivan, who hired Robert Kurtzman, Greg Nicotero and Howard Berger, working together for the first time, but going on to found practical effects powerhouse K&B Effects. You will have definitely seen their work if you've watched any film with practical effects in the last 30 years. Some of the wire work is a little janky, but before the advent of computers able to digitally erase wires, it was in almost all films using wire work. If you haven't seen it, then I hope this review doesn't spoil it. My partner hates horror films, doesn't like to be scared, and she enjoyed this because amongst the horror is silliness. I would also say, if you haven't seen the first film, it doesn't really matter, and you might actually prefer to watch this first. I saw this film first, and I was immediately made a fan of the whole series. Thank you. Goodbye.